Growing Up Weird.
Hi! Welcome to Growing Up Weird, which is a podcast co-hosted by me, Dr. Greg Dickens, talking to Dr. Gwen Bradbury about how early childhood affects later adulthood health, and a few other interesting bits of science along the way. This week, we are going to be talking about diaper dermatitis, or nappy rash if you are from Britain, and some interesting pieces of news. I also need to chuck in a quick announcement that I am fasting and feeling pretty bleeding weird, so if I start going off on bizarre tangents or just losing my thread entirely, please bear with me. As to why I'm fasting, it's because I've cut my leg, I don't want to go on antibiotics, and hopefully changing my blood over to ketogenic metabolism will help me with that. There are some interesting references and we will put them in the podcast notes. So, Gwen, how are you?
I'm great, Greg. I'm also thinking a lot about fasting, so that's slightly informed my pick of the week.
I'm glad to hear it. What is your pick of the week? Let's talk some news.
Okay, so, I was actually thinking a lot about fasting because, as Greg said, there is evidence now that it can shift certain types of immunity in a good way and others in a bad way. So if you're wanting to dial up your bacterial immunity,
like me,
like Greg, certain types of fasting seem to be pretty good. By the same token, you don't want to do it if you're suffering from certain viral infections. So, pick and choose, but can be useful. Anyway, I also was thinking a lot about fasting because Ramadan finished last week. So, Eid Mubarak to any of my Muslim listeners. But also because Ramadan's a really interesting case study in fasting. And it's one that a lot of researchers use to look at the effects of food restriction for a time period on different outcome measures. So, like all of these things, they've looked at weight control, they've looked at glucose, they've looked at cholesterol, all the kind of classic metabolic indicators. Mm-hmm. But there was a paper published a couple of months ago that I'm talking about it now because it is really topical. But the researchers asked, how does Ramadan fasting affect acne? And I thought that was really interesting because of, discussions about bacterial immunity. Mm-hmm. So what they found is that if you have a look at a person's skin before and after Ramadan, and you measure something called a Global Acne Grading System, GAGS, I'm not joking, that is the acronym they used, and they look at levels of inflammation and oxidative stress. Harsh, right?
How does not eating affect GAGS? That's awful. I hope that was a really punny title.
No, unfortunately it wasn't, but, still catchy enough to pique my interest. But what they found is that the intermittent fasting during Ramadan seems to have, in the people they studied, a significant benefit on reducing acne scores, altering the immune response and reducing oxidative stress. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And I will bear it in mind. And
absolutely.
Hopefully my pseudo-Ramadan for non-religious reasons.
And for a very short period of time, maybe your skin is going to be glowing.
How dare you? My skin's amazing anyway. Fascinating. I have some news. May I share some news?
Yeah, go for it.
Both of my news pieces are depressing. And both of them are to do with the brain. So I'm going to hustle through. First up, Michelle Custers et al. At the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, which, what a great name, published. So, okay, this slightly took me back. Published on the 15th of May, 2025.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's future
so
looking.
I went to check. The articles are all peer-reviewed and in place, but the journal isn't published until the 15th of May. So this is unpublished, published.
Right, love it.
It's complicated. Anyway, they looked at relationships between particulate air pollution around where babies grow up and their eventual brain connectedness. Mm-hmm. Obviously, increased particulate pollution damaging development of babies' brains is well known. It's been well known for a decade. But this particular study looked at precisely how the brains were changed by particulate pollution. They saw a decreased connection between... they saw all sorts of decreased connections, but a big one between the amygdala and the cortical network. Amygdala being the site of, terror and fear and anger and a whole bunch of other really primal emotions, and your cortical network being your more I don't want to say developed or evolved, but your less primitive parts of your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they said that this might lead to reduction in emotional resilience or overestimating the amount of danger you're in when you're an adult. Obviously, they haven't followed these babies for that long. It's only been like a year. But I think that's quite interesting because we've gone from smoke is bad, okay, to these particles will influence how your brain forms in exactly this way and could have these long-reaching effects. Anyway, if you are the sort of person who walks around near cars and there's one idling, maybe walk a little faster. But it won't bother you as much as it would bother the people in the cars, because those people in idling cars have 4 times the particulate load dropped on them as those people around the cars. So, don't be in an idling car. It's a bad move.
I have seen, though, nursery and school have been talking much more about idling. I think it is starting to get into parents' awareness that actually, oh my goodness, no matter how hot it is, no matter how cold it is, you really don't want to be putting your kids inside a box full of particles for particular pollution.
Yeah.
It's such a bad idea.
idea to stew brains in that sort of...
You do not want a brain marinated in particles.
Unless, of course, you would like lower emotional resilience and to overestimate the amount of danger you're in.
Absolutely. I mean, at least then you'll fit in with our general cultural trend, eh?
Oh, yes. Okay, let's not go down that alley. Second piece of news about the brain. Also a little doomy. I apologise, listeners. If this is your first one, I am not always this doomy. I don't think it's to do with fasting. I think it's just been a doomy week for news. This was in Nature Communications. I picked it up in Science Daily, and it is out of University of North Carolina by Susan Hoffman et al. Looking at phthalates. You familiar with phthalates?
Yeah, I thought it was phthalates. So,
I'm sorry, phthalates.
I have no idea.
It's one of those words like ophthalmology, which has too many H's. Like rhythm, honestly, too many H's. They're plasticizers used to make plastic less brittle, and they are found in shampoo bottles and water bottles and takeaway containers and all of that stuff. Anyway, for ages, people have gone, these are a little bit poisonous and they mess with your hormones. Maybe they might be dangerous for babies. And for ages, people have gone, nah, they're filtered out by the placenta. Let's not worry about it. Turns out, no. In a study of about 216 mother and baby pairs, the level of phthalate in the baby very closely correlates with the level of phthalate as encountered by the mother, so closely that it is really not chance. These things are going straight through the placenta. And I mentioned this is about the brain. They haven't done that connectome study like the other paper out of Barcelona. They haven't looked at exactly what's not connecting to what, but they have just done the amount of phthalate in the mother. If that increases, the overall amount of paying attention, holding attention, and general awareness decreases in the baby. They have not said if that's a lifelong effect, but as we know, you build on what you know to learn tomorrow's stuff. So nearly all neurodevelopmental things are somewhat exponential, pseudo-exponential. Getting a slow start, even if you don't hold on to that exact pathology, will slow you down. So yeah, the thing that I would like to add that they don't add in the paper is that if there is phthalate in your shampoo bottle and you spread that shampoo on your head and then rinse it off, you're not really putting yourself at too much risk. Like, yeah, sure, a tiny billionth of a nanogram or whatever might get through your scalp. The bigger risks here are food and drink. So if you are drinking out of a plastic water bottle, you have 2 choices, right? Either refill the old one or crack open a new one. Your new one is going to have a new plastic bottle's worth of phthalate in it, whereas your old one, you probably already drank that phthalate. So if you top it up with tap water, yeah, sure, it might dump a little tiny bit more, but nowhere near as much as a new bottle. What I'm saying is, just stay away from really new plastics where you can. There you go. There's my 2 really doomy news articles, and I apologise for those. I will try and be more upbeat next time when I'm not so hungry and cross and sad and tired.
Great, God, on that fantastic note, Greg.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Look, let's have some more cheerful stuff. What are we talking about this week, Gwen?
We're talking about nappy rash or diaper dermatitis.
I said already, didn't I?
Basically, the stuff that goes wrong with the baby's, inverted commas, private skin. I love that term.
That is a very professional way to put it. Private skin. Okay. Why is it important that we talk about baby's private skin? Because it's gross and I'd rather not.
Well, the thing is that diaper dermatitis, it causes a whole load of really unpleasant short-term consequences for a mother and baby. But it also causes and contributes to various more longer-term problems as well, which is why we're talking about it on this podcast.
So, to be clear here, diaper dermatitis, that is the red bleeding holes that open up. I saw a documentary. This is like a once in 100. What I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to lead Gwen in saying this is really common. Gwen, is this really common?
It's really common, Greg.
How common?
I think they reckon, some studies say, that 1 in 4 babies has diaper dermatitis at any one time.
Any given time?
Yep, and 100% of babies in nappies get diaper dermatitis. Now, that 100% figure, there are a lot of caveats around other practice the parents might be doing while the baby is wearing the nappy. But basically, if you have a child in diapers for several years of their life, doing the things that most people do, they are likely to have diaper dermatitis at least once and probably many times.
Yeah.
Usually it's not the bleeding stage. It is the really pink little bottom. It is the kind of raw, open, slightly weeping sores
Painful.
down the thighs.
Yeah.
Painful. Grim.
Yeah, grim. Okay. So we've talked about why we should dress it in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
Why the whole point of this podcast is early childhood experience affects long-term health. What's the long-term health problem here?
So I see there are 3 long-term problems arising from diaper dermatitis. Some of them affect all babies that are exposed in the long term. Most of them affect a subset. So the 3 that I think about are the big one is sleep. So diaper dermatitis, one of the key symptoms of diaper dermatitis is disturbed sleep. Now, we've talked about the importance of baby sleep many times on this podcast because it is, just as you said earlier, with that kind of exponential curve, baby sleep is when baby brains develop. And things that disrupt baby sleep, even for quite a short period in early life, can have profound effects on how that baby's brain develops. Mm-hmm. And we know, for example, that allergies cause sleep disruption. And through the sleep disruption caused by allergies, we have babies who have allergies have an increased risk of ADHD, for example. Because of that sleep disruption. Similarly, and weirdly, babies that have had antihistamines early in life, usually the drowsy antihistamines, they also have an increased risk of ADHD, but not because it's like allergy, it's because they also screw a baby's sleep. So we know that altering a baby's sleep can have profound consequences in the long term. And actually, if you have, if you can imagine, I can imagine, if you have a really sore bottom and you can't sleep properly, and this happens actually quite frequently, it can have quite an impressive cumulative effect on that baby's brain health during that critical part of its development.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine that. Okay, sleep is a big thing. What else is going on here?
The second thing is exposure to antibiotics and other antifungals, etc., because of the colonisation of damaged skin by pathogens. That might be things like candida, so a fungus, but also you can get bacterial skin infections in that area. When you have a bacterial skin infection that develops, the way to treat it is usually through antibiotics. And again, because of that cumulative effect, disruption to a baby's microbiome early in life can have profound consequences later in life, even if the microbiome returns to normal, because during the critical developmental phase, the microbiome was wrong. So we want to really be trying to reduce antibiotics as much as possible. Diaper dermatitis is one of the ways that babies are, one of the reasons for which babies are prescribed antibiotics.
Now, I asked this even though you've never told me you know the answer. So the answer is no. don't worry about it. But do you happen to know what proportion of antibiotics before, say, the age of 2 are down to diaper dermatitis?
I don't.
That's fine.
No,
I bet it's lots. I'm going to look it up. Which brings us on to the third and final lasting effect of nappy rash. What was it?
Allergies.
Oh, okay.
So on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how allergies develop when you have 3 things. You have a disrupted skin barrier.
Yeah, I remember this one.
You have a something that trashes the microbes to make something that is inflammatory that crosses the skin.
And you have something for them to be allergic to.
Exactly.
It's that old make a vaccine hypothesis.
Exactly.
Make a bad vaccine by combining a delivery mechanism, something to irritate the immune system, and an epitope, something to be allergic to. Fascinating. And you're saying what? That diaper dermatitis, by breaking the skin, gives you your delivery mechanism?
Yep.
And I can see there's a lot of things floating around to be allergic to, assuming your child has been eating things.
Yep. And is coated in poo. Let's just say that.
I didn't want to say it. I was trying to protect the listener.
I'm sorry, folks.
And you got your baby smeared in dung.
Yep. Full of food allergens.
Full of food allergens. How is it then that we're annoying the immune system? By breaking apart those bacteria, of course, which are broken apart by bile, etc. And I assume if people are using wipes, they'll be breaking them apart with surfactant as well. Mm-hmm. Wow, it's a really effective system. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. So 3 lasting problems here: lack of sleep leading to a kind of developmental delay. I use those words in inverted commas. Yeah. Increased risk of antibiotic use, which would knack your microbiome at its most important time, and increased risk of allergy. Okay, fine. You're right. It deserves to be on the podcast. Let's talk about it. What is it we're talking about first? We should talk about exactly what this process is, right? What is nappy rash? Mm-hmm. You're looking at me like you want me to answer this. All right, fine. I'll give it my best shot.
You are a skin wizard, Greg.
Ah, skin wizard. Sounds like something horrible from Dungeons and Dragons. Behold the skin wizard. All right. Taking that on and putting on my pointy hat. 3 things, I guess, come out of a baby's back end. First up, you've got water. And that's going to be coming out through the skin itself as transepithelial water loss. For those of you who don't know, and I assume that's 1 person in a million, water comes out through your skin. That's the whole thing with trying to protect your skin barriers. A lot of it is trying to keep water in. Water will come out of all skin all the time. But if you put a big waterproof thing on the top, then instead of that water blowing away in the breeze, it will be caught and you'll get a really humid environment. Gwen, you're nodding at me like I'm going the right way with this. Mm-hmm. If you then add to that even more water, if, say, the baby wheezes, that water's not going to be immediately caught by the sodium polyacrylate or whatever it is in nappies, and you're going to get wet skin. We've talked about skin barrier before, and the outer layers are formed by protein, very flat protein-packed cells called squamocytes or corneocytes, depending on where they are. And those are nice and waterproof because they're glued together with ceramide and wax and other interesting fats. But if they get waterlogged, they become a lot less strong and a lot less waterproof. So you're going to have water going both ways into and out of the skin here, which is not going to be good. But they don't just get less waterproof, they get less tough. Think about the bottom of a pie, right? The top has got the same amount of water coming through it from the inside of the pie, but because it's open to the air, it dries out and becomes quite tough. The underside has the same amount of water coming through it from the middle of the pie, but because it hasn't got anywhere to go, it can't evaporate. It becomes a soft, flobby, horrible, slimy gunk. And as soon as you try and do anything with it, it breaks. Well, the same thing's true with the skin.
Just going to stop there a moment.
What?
such a good analogy.
Oh God, I thought you were going to shoot me down.
I love the idea that we're just basically pies.
I am mostly a pie. How dare you?
And also, listeners, you should know that this man is very, very selective about the pies he eats. He absolutely insists that there's pastry on the bottom, because if you just put pastry on top, it's not a pie. However, he is also being scathing about the bottom pastry of a pie. So it feels to me, Greg, like there's no way to win here.
Okay. I reckon a pie should be cooked on something that is breathable.
Yeah.
Right?
So flobbly when you make it.
I don't want a pie in a nappy. I want a pie that's cooked in a sieve. Next time I make a pie, it's going to be in a damn sieve, right? But yes, if it hasn't got pastry all the way around, it's just a casserole with a hat on, right? None of this pie. And to be clear, if it hasn't got pastry on the top, it's a quiche. Or at best, a tart.
Please, folks, do contribute your views on how you coat different sorts of fillings with pastry and how you describe them.
But yes, I am basically just a filling covered in pastry.
Okay, so that's water.
So that's water, yeah. You as your skin gets wetter, it gets softer and weaker. It's much more likely to break and tear, leading to the kind of weeping, the irritation, the pain. If on top of that, it wasn't just water that came out of your baby's bladder, it was actual proper urine, then it contains urea, which will mess with the skin's pH and throw off the microbiome living there, because microbiome is very pH sensitive. That'll mean you've got the wrong bugs living there. That'll mean they're releasing the wrong things, which will irritate your skin even further and make it likely that your immune system underneath is already slightly annoyed before the next thing happens, which I assume is getting poo all over the place. Yeah. I sound like I've never changed a nappy. I have changed a nappy. I've got 3 children.
You changed a whole lot of nappies.
Thank you. I was worried.
Very much appreciated.
I was worried Graham was going to say I hadn't on live
Absolutely
podcasting.
It's like, I put the milk in and then I gave it to you.
They're just little pies. Anyway, so in that fecal explosion, there are bunch of bacteria, and they're going to go through this recently damaged skin and really upset the immune system. That's going to lead to the redness and the pain. But to make things extra worse, you've got the digestive enzymes. They're going to drop out and then get reactivated by that the raised pH, which shouldn't be raised. And they're going to start chewing through the skin because it's made of protein and they're designed to eat protein. So the baby's going to start digesting itself. Have I missed anything here, Gwen? It sounds like a recipe for disaster. Yeah,
it's pretty awful, really. It's hard to think of a better way to damage the skin barrier.
I can imagine one better, which is to put a whole bunch of moisturizers on beforehand.
Oh, why would you say that, Greg?
Why would I say that? Because I know from the evidence I've read that moisturizer worsens skin barrier function in some ways, and that macerating the skin even further, macerating meaning to waterlog and soften, is not going to help things at all. And if I remember rightly,
it does increase the risk of allergy. There's now a few studies.
I thought I'd read that.
Because, and it feels so counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because when your skin is all, when you have really bad eczema and you clearly have bad barrier function, one of the pillars of management of eczema is emollient creams or moisturizers. And so people think, oh, well, okay, if I do this, if there's a problem, if I do it in advance, then maybe it will be protective. But we've now got really good evidence that moisturizer use doesn't decrease the risk of allergies, but it does increase the risk of skin infections. And again, this is just when we think about, how people are taught to look after babies' private skin.
Yeah.
Like lotions and creams are a major part of that.
Right. Okay, yeah. It is the perfect device for trashing baby skin and then creating a lovely little environment to get allergies, trash sleep, and occasionally need antibiotics, which will hit you just when you really don't need them to.
Yeah.
Okay, we've laid out the downsides here, but this is a hopeful podcast about bringing in tips, techniques, and ways forward. What are the other approaches to solving this problem, and where do we find them?
What we used to do, and what people in other cultures still sometimes do, is raise babies without nappies at all.
Brave.
Yeah, very brave. And actually the degree to which there are no nappies is very different. So a lot of cultures might use a rag or might use something to prevent absolute chaos if they don't react quite in time. But the real fundamental difference...
Well, hang on. React to what?
Yeah, okay. So react to when a baby needs a wee or a poo. So I guess that the sort of difference is whether you have a culture that takes a reactive approach to a baby's toileting,
Okay.
or a culture that takes a proactive approach.
Okay, which means you can tell a baby needs the toilet in advance.
Yes, you can after a certain period, but even right when a baby is newborn, you have some good indications or good times that a baby might need to go to the toilet.
After eating, after waking up.
Yep,
Okay.
after eating, after
Same as
waking
me.
up, after being moved off a parent. So again, I didn't know this. I don't know why we didn't get taught this at vet school, Greg. But tiny humans have a reflex not to crap all over you.
Wow, what a surprise when you think about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And yeah, it's definitely not fail-safe, as those of us who have been crapped on by babies will attest to. But in general, babies tend to get quite upset and start to move around quite a lot on if they're on a parent or caregiver, if they need the toilet.
Okay.
And that's one of the signals that people can use to see when a baby needs to go to the toilet.
Okay, I think I understand reactive. That's changing a baby when it has pooed in your nappy. Well, its nappy, preferably not your nappy. That's just odd. Anyway, that's reactive.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned proactive. What does proactive really look like?
So, proactive means that your mindset is that when the baby needs to toilet, you are going to allow it to toilet outside of the nappy. And so this is something that we've got a lot of experience of, because when we went travelling, our youngest was 18 months and she had to be out of nappies day and night, because when we flew, that was our last nappy. There are no nappies in the jungle. And so we had to start right from the early stages with her, doing these behaviours to set her up for that point at 18 months when she was able to be nappy free. And so what we did was, from birth, we knew the times that she was likely to go. So, for example, you said eating, sleeping, moving, or changing between situations. Mm-hmm. Those were times that we could predict. There were also cues that we looked for. So a baby, one easy one to see if you're breastfeeding and the baby starts popping on and popping off the breast and is not properly suckling, often that's because they need a wee or a poo.
You're missing a whole bunch of great hand signals here, listeners. There's all sorts of mime happening.
No, it's such a physical thing. It's such like a movement fluency thing, because I've done it so many times. You know, you just kind of go, yep. Oh right, this is what it's doing.
And now she's giving a baby a wee.
Okay, so popping on and off. A baby that suddenly starts to wiggle and get upset. One of my favourite one that I only learned from someone else who mentioned it, and I was like, I've seen that too. The eyelids go pink. Certainly on a white baby, you can see that the eyelids go pink. Oh my goodness, how cool is that as a signal? But so that you're looking for, there are certain times when a baby might need the toilet, and there are certain cues they give when they're really small. And that period lasts probably for the first 3 months or so, but all the time the parent, i.e. you, is getting better and better at looking for those signs, and the baby is able to go longer and longer between eliminations. So actually it gets much easier when they're really small. Like, you know, in the first couple of weeks they can pee like every 10 minutes, so you're never going to catch it all. But by the time they're kind of 3 months, you often get to the point where actually you don't often have to clean poo off them, and by the time they're 6 months, you virtually never have them pooing in a nappy. That's the aim, because again, by that point, they're pooing quite occasionally. And then you can also start to tell, because the baby expects to be held out or to be able to toilet. And so actually, if you then, when they're quite small, I said you do it on time. So you just offer them the chance to go to the toilet. Actually,
again, lot of mime here. I should describe. Gwen is moving her hands around as if she is holding a small baby's thighs and holding it into a little squat where its little knees are up around its chin, and she's carefully holding its heels out of the way of anything that might come flying out.
Yeah.
And she's holding it off to one side as if over a pot or a flower bed.
Yeah, absolutely. Initially, you hold them out quite frequently, but then as they get to, 7, 8, 9 months, then they start to, if they don't need the toilet, they start to wriggle and look really cross, like, what are you doing? I clearly don't need to go right now. And then that progresses. And sure, there are ups and downs because, they learn different things, or they're sort of developing all the time. But my top tip, if you want to try it, hold the baby in a squat position. There are loads and loads of pictures of this online. And give it the chance to let all of the valves open. So what I used to do was to count to 50. So you hold them out, count 1, 2, 3, 4, and yeah, you can tickle their toes or you can move them a bit, but get to 50. If you can also blow on their bits, Greg's now mimicking.
Yeah, miming.
Because blowing on their genitals helps them to realise that they are indeed out of a nappy. So that's quite a useful one. You can put it on a sound cue. So we used to go pss, 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 to indicate that they were going to, that they needed a
Just
wee.
leave out the vowel and you don't have to censor it.
But then, yeah, it is amazing how quickly you learn as a parent to see when a baby needs a wee. And I think that was something that we found when we were very attuned to our baby's cues. Actually, it was quite easy to spot when other babies needed the toilet.
It is a very conserved thing between babies. I wondered when we kicked all this off whether it was a learnt process from both sides, as in they learnt what we reacted to and we reacted to whatever they'd picked up. It turns out it was us doing a lot more work than them.
Yeah.
In that their signals appear to be hardwired in because they're very similar to a bunch of other babies that I've seen on the train, on the plane, elsewhere, doing the exact same thing. And then about 10 minutes later, suddenly relaxing and the mother going, oh, does somebody need a change? It's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
But it is just too weird to stand up to somebody on a train and go, your baby needs a wee. Because they'll be like, are you the worst psychic ever? What are you doing? Sit down.
There is a weird thing as well where you kind of get a clock in your brain.
Yep.
Where I could be in the other room and I'd be like, baby needs a wee. Even though I wasn't seeing the baby, but clearly something, you do it so many times that your brain's like, right, it's about this long and you're hearing this noise, and therefore putting these things together means that you need to go and take that baby's nappy off.
For non-parents, I'm going to chuck in a little bit of interest here. This black box learning of you have no idea how you know what you know is fascinating and comes up again and again in more traditional parenting, where people react to, oh, she doesn't like that, or oh, he needs the toilet, and you say, how do you know? And they say, I don't know. And it's just a combination of 100 little cues that you haven't consciously noticed that you've noticed, that you put together in such a way that if rewarded correctly by a very immediate reward, say not getting peed on, are a very powerful learning stimulus if they're all put together. But if you hide that stimulus beneath 1.5 inches of sodium polyacrylate, polyester, cotton, whatever else is in a nappy, and you don't notice for 20 minutes that your baby's weed, then you utterly lose the ability to learn from those just about subconscious signals. Anybody who's into AI, consider what would happen to your training set if you delayed the input by 10 minutes and made it very, 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 very noisy. Your system would not learn, and neither do I as a parent.
Well, I think I'm going to pick up on one thing you just said, which was, I thought it was going to be both of us learning, and actually, we did the bulk of the work.
We did.
You're absolutely right, but the one thing that babies do apparently learn from being held out in that position is they learn how to fully empty their bladder, and they learn how to fully empty their bowel. And for a long time, we in Western cultures, we've assumed that this was a kind of It was just a skill that developed with time, usually around the age of 3. And that's why a load of our recommendations on potty training are like, let the child do it in their own time, because they need to learn the skill of voiding their bladder. And it's also why actually a lot of parents who try potty training early, they get really frustrated because they're like, the child just leaks all the time. Like every 10 minutes there's a little pool of urine. That's a sign of a baby that's never learned to properly empty its bladder. And that will come, but it might come quite late. But one of the really interesting things that a paper a couple of years ago now looked at a group of children in Vietnam and children in Sweden. And they looked at how able they were to fully empty their bladder during urination. And what they found was that, sure enough, the children in Sweden who were, diapered, put in nappies in the normal way, they developed the skill of fully voiding their bladder at around the age of 3, which is what is expected. But then when they looked in Vietnam, where the children are routinely held out to urinate and defecate from a very early age, most of the infants had the skill by about 9 months of age. Mm-hmm. Now that is a phenomenal difference. There are, if you think about those two cohorts of children, there is one cohort that I would like to potty train, and there is one, oh my goodness, I will pay the extra whatever, how many $100 it is to buy nappies for a year. I will take the extra 350 kilograms of nappy waste per child, because they are just not in a place that they are able to toilet train. And I think that is a really key piece. People think, what is the baby learning? They are learning the skill of fully emptying their bladder or bowel. Interesting. And emotive and disgusting and intelligent and curious. All right. Is there anything else we should add? Because I have a question for you from a listener, which is related. Yeah, let's go for that. All right. Now, most of our listener questions are submitted through Substack, through YouTube, through, we've had a couple through LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's an email address. But this one was given to me by somebody who said, I've been listening to your podcast in the park. So this is a question from the park today. Which places on Earth still routinely do a no nappy upbringing for children? And I don't mean America because they call them diapers. I mean a properly no nappy upbringing. So, as we saw when we were travelling, a lot of cultures are moving towards disposable diapers because of various marketing forces. But there is one culture which really stands out where diaper free is still very common, and that is China. And China is therefore a really interesting source of information because it has a lot of cultural knowledge of this practice. It's not like in the West, where typically the people doing it are people who've learned about it from a book or read something or seen something on Instagram and they're like, oh, I'm going to try this. It's not, it's actually, you've got a strong lineage, a strong cultural memory of this practice. And so having split crotch trousers is very common. Having babies that are out of diapers for long periods of time is also really common. And it means that they've also been able to track what's happened at a population level as the population has shifted more towards disposable diaper use. Because, for example, they've seen that things like bedwetting has more than doubled in frequency. They have looked at bladder and bowel dysfunction. So problems with being able to control your bladder and bowel. That's in the name, Gwen. I don't know why I've just said it twice. And so they've had studies from universities that have looked at the comparison between children who have ever been held out to go to the toilet and those who never have, and they found enormous differences, enormous increased risk in children who use disposable diapers. But what's really cool is that because we have this this culture which is industrialized but still has a strong cultural tradition, it means that we have control groups and we have comparators, and we have cohort studies, which we just don't have in the West. Fascinating. An answer that was informative and also very useful. I'm going to be reading more Chinese nappy studies. Yeah, absolutely. Might also be where I go to look up the answer to my previous question. Yeah. Right. Thank you very much, Guinevere. Thank you, listener. We will be back
approximately weekly with more Growing Up Weird podcasts. Until then, see you later.
Goodbye.
Bye.